Next up on the work support is the sliding part that includes the top. Before I start into that, just a quick note here. So I've got this all sanded now. I did sand all the way on these corners here because the guides that guide the sliding part, they end about here. So I can sand down to here. About the only thing I have not sanded is these corners right here, just in this area. On the sliding legs, I've cut these to length, and I'm going to route a 7/16 wide slot, 5 inches from each end in here. Before I start the routing, I marked my parts here. So I've got a line 5 inches from each end. It goes all the way across on both sides of the part. You'll see why I do that in a minute. I've got a 3/8 router bit in here, and this needs to be a bit that you can plunge with, which means it has to have some kind of cutting feature right to the center of the bit, and this one has that. I've got the bit set for, about 3/8 of an inch depth of cut. And what I want to do is center the bit on the workpiece. So I've also got a line here that I carefully drew in the center. It's really important that you get this alignment set correctly. And I'm going to turn the bit, because there is in the center of this bit, which I'm sure you can't see, there I can tell where the middle is. So what I want to do is align that so that the fence puts that line right in the middle of the bit. And then I'm going to move the fence back about a 30-second. So I'm looking for a 30-second gap there. So I'm going to actually tighten down one end of the fence so I can just move the other end. So I'm going to move that back just a little bit there. Okay, I had to do a little tweaking there. I didn't have these tight against my fence. So the line is centered. I've got a little gap there. And I'm going to turn the bit so that the cutters are facing this direction. And I need to mark on here, and in this case, I can move my backers here because I need to know when the bit starts cutting and when it ends cutting. Okay, I've got my fence aligned there so that I know where the cut begins and ends. Now, if you don't have a split fence, if this is just solid, then I would draw lines on your fence so you know the same positions. So what I'm going to do next, this bit is not long enough to go all the way through this. So I'm going to come in a little bit at a time from each face, and that's why I need lines on both sides of the board. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to drop it down, and like I said, I know where the bit starts cutting and ends cutting. So I'm going to drop it down there, go to the other end, and I'll back up a little bit to clear it and then pull it off. And then I'm going to turn it around and do the same thing from the other side. And that's why it's really important that once you find center, you move the fence away from the router bit, because when I make the second cut, I want to make sure I'm cutting on this side of the bit, because then I'll be doing a push cut. If I had moved the fence towards the bit, on the second cut, I'd be cutting on this side of the original cut, and I'd be doing a climb cut, and the bit would want to grab the piece and move it the same direction I want to move it. which I think I can show you what happens when you make that mistake. So here we go. Okay, I've made the first passes on both sides of each part. I haven't gone all the way through yet, so I'm going to raise the bit a little more and do one more set of cuts. Now I should point out, whenever I start the drop cut, I've really got my right hand anchored here so that the piece can't kick back. So I guess I could put a stop there, but I don't really have quite enough room there. So anyway, just make sure that when you drop, you're anchored pretty well here. And also, I've got this hand kind of anchored like that, so that if for some reason it did kick back, because I'm kind of anchored here, my hand can't get pulled into the bit, or certainly not as easily pulled into the bit. So anyway, I'm going to raise the bit a little bit and go ahead and finish up these cuts. Okay, so that turned out nice. Got nice smooth surfaces there. I mean, there's a minor mismatch in there, but that's certainly not going to hurt anything. So because I'm using a 3/8 bolt, and this is slightly wider than the 3/8 because I offset this when I was routing it, I should have a little bit of clearance here, so that should work out nicely. Next, I'm going to sand these, just, because the step after that is to mill the guides that fit on either side here. I've got the sliding legs sanded and installed, so I've got carriage bolts through here, and then you can see on this side I've got some knobs here. Now in the parts list I show this knob, which I like a little bit better. It's just easier to tighten, not that you need to get them super tight, but these also work fine. And when I went to my local woodcraft store to get these, they were out of them because unfortunately the store was closing in a few days. So they had these, and so I purchased them. So 3/8, and they're going to work fine. So I've got my guides here, and I'm going to go to the planer and mill these. I'm going to keep them square, so of course I'll mill at least two faces until they fit nicely in between here. And I don't want them tight because I want this to slide, but just I won't even say snug. They need to be guiding this, but allowing it to move. I've got these all milled now, and I've sanded them. Now I marked the face, kind of the least attractive or roughest face, whatever, that I'm going to be attaching here. So I did not sand that face, but I sanded the other three. I cut them to length. So I cut one end square that's going to be at the top, and the other end I cut at an angle. Not a big deal, but I think it looks a little nicer. So these are going to go in here flush with the top. I'm going to use 3 screws to attach them. One thing I want to point out is for this top screw, it's hard to get inside here, with a screw to mark the pilot and drive the screw. So I typically put this top screw, down here so I can get my drill in there. So I'm going to put 1, 2, 3 screws and attach these so they're flush with the outer edges of the fixed leg. Okay, so as you can see, I had these clamped in place when I installed them, just to hold them while I went through the pilot hole and screw installation process. So this is good to go. This slides nicely. It's a touch looser than I'd like, but it's going to be fine. Next, I'm going to cut rabbets in the top and bottom of the sliding leg parts. At the top, it's for the frame, and at the bottom, it's for the tray. Note that I've marked which is the top and which is the bottom, so I can keep track, because of course the rabbets are going to be different sizes. And they're also on different sides of the leg. So one of them's on the inside. This is the top. So this is actually on the outside. And then at the bottom, it's on the inside. So I've just marked all of these corners so I know which is which. And I've got a T at the top and a B at the bottom. So for the top one, I've got my sled set up here. Now I'm not using a dado set. I'm using my Forest, we call the box joint blade. It makes a square top kerf. And I find just for small stuff like this, it's easier to use this than set up the dado set. This one I've got set for about a 1/2 inch deep, roughly half the thickness of the part. The depth is going to be the same for both rabbets. But the width is different. So on the one at the top, I want the width to be slightly less than the frame member, width and thickness. So I've set this up so that, remember, the rabbit's going to be from this edge of the curve to the stop. So I'm about a 1/16 less than that, and that'll become clear later why I'm doing that. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to start making a bunch of cuts, go across here, and then for the bottom rabbit, that one is the width of that is the thickness of the tray bottom. So I'll reset my stop and cut that also. Okay, that turned out good. So here's the top one. And, the depth is the same, about a 1/2 inch. So that's what I'm looking for. I want this top edge of the leg to be slightly below the frame part. And at the bottom, this is the bottom of the tray, that is nice and flush there. The next step is to create dados in two of the short frame members to fit on the sliding legs. I marked on here the width of the dado, and on each piece I've got marked where I want to cut. The depth of the dado should match the thickness here, so I've set the dado set up to match that, and it either needs to match that exactly or be a touch deeper. If anything, I want this to slide on a little too far so that this surface would end up being below this surface. So I think I'm set up here. I'm going to, just like before, I'll set a stop over here. All right, that went well. So that fits on there nicely. So remember, that should be slightly below that. This is slightly prior to this. So the reason for that is the inner piece, the filler block, is going to fit here. So I want to make sure that it doesn't interfere with this. So it's fine that this is lower than that. So the next thing I'm going to do is cut the half lap joints where all of these parts come together. So at the corners, there's going to be half lap. Of course, one of these will be long. So on the ends of all these pieces, not the filler blocks, I'm going to cut half lap, and at the ends of the long pieces, I'll do the same thing. So in order to set that up, I'm going to set the stop for the width of one of these parts, and I'll set the depth so that when I put two of them together, everything is flush. All right, I'm set up now. I've got my stop set. So the way I set the stop is I aligned my workpiece with the right side of the blade here and set the stop right. So that gives me, when I make a cut, the width of this rabbet will match the width of this part. And then for the depth, I found center of one of these and set the height. I think I'm a little bit on the low side, so I'll sneak up on it. And what I'm going to do here, these are my two filler block pieces that are a little bit long right now. So I'm going to use these to make test cuts. I'll make a narrow cut at the end of each of them and see how they fit together. And once I've got the height dialed in, I'll cut the rest of the parts. All right, I made my first test cut, and I'm going to check this, make sure those are flat, and it doesn't quite go together yet. I need to raise the blade just a teeny bit. I don't know if you can see that gap underneath there, but it's pretty close. So once I've got that dialed in, I'll make all the cuts. Okay, all the ends of all the parts are rabbeted, and I want to make sure we leave this set up here because we still have to make the rest of the cuts in the long frame member parts. But before we do that, I want to get the tray parts in place. I've got the legs installed now upside down in the base, and they're both sticking out the same amount. I drilled all of my clearance holes and countersinks to attach the bottom and the sides of the tray. So what I'm going to do, like I did for the stretchers, I'll cut one end of this nice and square, and then hold it up here, mark with my marking knife, cut it to length, and go ahead and install those. So fairly straightforward. Okay, the tray is on. So I've got 2 screws in each part on each end, and I put 4 more screws here, 2 in each side. So that's all nice and flush. Next, I'm going to take these apart. I'll kind of finish sanding the rest of the bottom here, flip this over, make sure everything works, and then we'll get started on the frame.